Good morning, everyone. My name's Ben Wallace. I'm a partner at KPMG. I lead our National Policy, Economics and Public Impact practice and also the Human and Social Services sector globally. It's my great pleasure today to welcome you to this 8th webinar in the Governing for Reform webinar series, focused on developing our leaders of tomorrow, why we must invest. Can I start by acknowledging the lands on which I'm coming to you from today, the lands of the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains, and pay respects to elders past, present and emerging. The Kaurna people have lived and cared for this land for more than 60,000 years. It always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Can I also pay respects to the cultural authority of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people coming to us from other lands today, Manina Budni from Kaurna land. Aged care is one of the most important services we provide as a society to our citizens, and there is a rightful focus on transformation to achieve safe, high quality and customer-centred services. We know that whilst the sector has delivered some amazing care and services to older Australians over time, that equally there have been some significant failings in care provided to some. We also know that investing in leadership and getting the right skill mix, both on executives and governing boards, are critical to delivering on the change required. So often when we reflect on the success or failure of large-scale change, leadership is identified as one of the key variables, and not just the heroic leadership of an individual, but the leadership of a team and a diverse team in delivering that change. A strong leadership culture is also important to both attracting talent from outside the sector and also to developing the people we have within the sector to become our leaders of tomorrow, the next group of executives, chief executives, governing body members and chairs. Today's webinar, we'll have the pleasure of talking to Rosina Hislop, to Tony Walker and to Elizabeth Compton, who I'm really excited to be leading a discussion with today. The aim of that discussion is to talk about the why of investing in leadership, but also to get their insights drawn from their significant experience in the sector on the how of investing in and growing our leaders. Before we get started, I'm conscious that while many of you may have joined previous webinars and been participants in the Governing for Reform series, that some of you might be here for the first time. So for those of you who are new, there is a wealth of information available at gfr.agecarequality.gov.au. You'll be able to find there a whole range of resources, including Leading the Transformation, an online learning module, Building an Effective Governing Body Toolkit, all of the previous webinars in the series, and access to a whole range of other learning opportunities through podcasts, workshops, coaching and action learning groups. Before we dive into the discussion today, I'd just like to draw your attention to the platform we're working with. You'll see a number of windows on your screen. You're able to adjust those to your personal preferences, so you can drag and drop those windows to whatever sort of shape and configuration works best for you. You'll also note on your screen that there is a question and answer box. We'll be spending most of our time today talking to the panellists, but we'll also try and reserve some time for questions from the audience at the end. So if the conversation generates a question or a thought from you, please feel free to pop it into the question and answer box, and we'll endeavour to get to some of those questions towards the end of today's session. So can I now please introduce our amazing panellists, and thank you so much for giving your time to us today in what is a very busy lead up to the holiday period. We have with us today Rosina Hislop, who's a really experienced board director. She's a national facilitator with the Australian Institute of Company Directors, an AICD fellow who serves on boards across the health, education and aged care sectors. Rosina facilitates an AICD course governing to protect vulnerable people, is a chartered accountant and former partner with Ernst & Young, working with global companies on corporate strategy, finance and business model innovation. So welcome, Rosina. We've got also with us Tony Walker. Tony Walker's the former Chief Executive of Ambulance Victoria, having 36 years plus of experience in clinical, operational and leadership roles in the ambulance sector. He's a fellow of the Australasian College of Paramedicine, holds bachelor's in paramedic studies and a master's of education. He's currently an adjunct professor with Monash University and a non-executive director on a range of boards, including Emergency Services Foundation, the Prostate Cancer Foundation of Australia and TLC for Kids. Lastly, we have Elizabeth Compton joining us today, who's got a wealth of experience in both executive and governing board roles across Australia, London, Amsterdam and New York. She's worked across a breadth of sectors as well, including financial services, automotive, transport, health and government. She's currently non-executive director at Southern Cross Care, SANT in Victoria, and the chair of the Continence Foundation of Australia. Previously, as CEO of Language Loop, she led a significant digital and organisational transformation and has previously worked with VicTrack, the Financial Ombudsman Service and the Environmental Protection Authority. So I'd love now to dive into the panel session and welcome to you all on screen. Thank you again so much for making the time available in this pre-holiday period. I'd like to open up, I guess, with a general question. You've all had significant experience both in governing body roles, but also as members of executive teams. And one of the themes I'm keen to draw out today around leadership is, what are the sorts of leadership characteristics you've seen through your careers that are central characteristics at all times? But then perhaps reflecting on what's happening for us in aged care at the moment, what maybe are the unique characteristics of leadership required to support leadership through this period of change and transformation in the aged care sector? And so I might hand first to you, Rosina, for some reflections on that.
Sure. I think in terms of leadership characteristics on any of my boards, the top one I look for is values-based leadership. So are the values aligned of the leaders with the organisation and the board? And by values, I mean what we defend under pressure. So we're all absolutely aligned on that. I think reflecting on the aged care sector and where we're at there, from a board perspective, we really need CEOs that are prepared to think differently and take risks. And by risks, I might be talking about business or financial risk rather than, hold true to we have to provide safe, quality, client-focused care, but think more creatively about how we do that. And it's all very well to tell our leadership team we want them to be creative, but we also need to support them then to fail fast and learn. And I think that's an area where actually boards can step up. How do they support, stretch, really help that capability to be creative and actually role model that creativity in their own thinking, and then support them to be able to do things differently to maximise those client outcomes, to maximise that the client is at the centre of, they have a better quality of life, they're at the centre of what's happening, the care is safe, it provides dignity, but the thinking that got us to where we are at the moment is actually not going to get us out of here. So we just need to think very differently for the future. And I think the key is that boards need to be prepared to support their CEOs and executive teams to do that.
Thanks, Rosina. And we'll tease out a little bit more later the role of the board in this and the role of the executive and how the governing body can support and enable that culture. Liz, I might move to you next. A couple of themes there from Rosina about sort of values base and values alignment being at the centre, and then I think what I was hearing was for aged care now, what we also need is some calculated risk, I think, and not risk to quality of care, but some risks in the way in which we go about trying to achieve those outcomes. Other thoughts from you?
Yeah, I definitely concur with that. I mean, I think generally, you absolutely have to be aligned on values and be invested in the purpose of the organisation. So really, if you're a member of an organisation sitting on the board or the executive, that you're there for the right reasons, and that's that values and purpose alignment. And I think across the board, self-awareness is so important, respect, good communication skills, but definitely in this environment of just incredible change, every part of aged care, retirement living, in-home care, there is just such a plethora of change, regulatory funding change coming, that I think that the ability to really think critically, to look at what else is happening, how else can we deliver services in such a changing environment, changing consumer needs, that you create this space to perhaps think differently about risk. And it's interesting, I was lucky enough to be in Europe in July, August, and I visited a number of very progressive aged care organisations and dementia care organisations. And the way they looked at risk is, I would say they have a much higher risk tolerance, but it's in an environment where they can do that. So it's difficult because we have a very stringent regulatory compliance regime, and obviously we're incredibly focused on care. And so how do you balance that with also encouraging risk taking? So it's definitely, an area that we're looking at. We've had all kinds of guest speakers come in to challenge us and to really make us think hard about how in this changing environment we can innovate and continue to deliver really outstanding care.
Thanks, Liz. I think that's a really interesting set of observations, and we do have a heightened regulatory environment for reasons I think we all understand, and finding the room for innovation within that allows you both to comply, but also to stretch and do new things is an interesting challenge. And it's one, and Tony, I might get your reflections on this as well. I think one of the debates across industries in the leadership space over recent decades, and where we've evolved our thinking a lot, is that difference between sort of adaptive and technical leadership. Or when I first started doing sort of management training, it was sort of management and leadership was this contrast. And so Tony, I know you've sort of come up from a clinical and more of a technical background into leadership roles, and interested just in teasing out, your view on the characteristics of leadership we need these days. And I know you're not as directly involved in the aged care sector, but how you've seen that perhaps evolve over time.
Yes, certainly. I think if you look at, you're right, if you look at sort of the technical skills that leaders have, and often people are employed or promoted on the basis of good technical skills, and then find themselves challenged by those skills not necessarily being equally applicable in the leadership and developing roles. But if I look at the pandemic as an example, it is created an environment that the expectation has been in many sectors that you have to innovate and do things differently to deliver care safely in ways that we probably didn't expect we would have to do a number of years ago. So I think there is a real need to focus on that understanding of the environment we're working in is driving different ways of thinking. I think Rosina's comment early on, definitely the values-based leadership is really critical. But I think the important thing for me is being prepared to think differently, and it's been discussed a couple of times already this afternoon. Thinking differently about how we do the work we do and not doing more of the same. And I think, my experience has been the pandemic has enabled that. It has actually created an environment where organisations have been forced to think differently and to seriously consider their risk tolerance. Now, again, it's got to be in the framework of a legislative and governance framework. But the risk tolerance today, I can tell you, in many organisations delivering healthcare is a lot different to what it would have been even thought of being 3 years ago. And through that, again, with good board governance and good preparedness of boards to say, well, we understand we have to do things differently, and the tolerances are set by the board, then that actually enables things to be done differently into the future. The other big value for me, two values, or two or three, attributes for me. One is around being really focused on the data in front of you. So getting people comfortable with moving away from the anecdote to actually what's the data telling us. And many organisations say, well, we don't have that data. Every organisation's got data to look at. And to be clear, the right things you're looking at are really critical. That risk focus we've already talked about before, and a real preparedness to think differently about how to deliver into the future, because we're not going to solve the problems of tomorrow with the same thinking of today. And we've learned that, as I said, I mentioned during the pandemic. I think that's been a wake-up call for many of us in the way we deliver services.
Thanks, Tony. I'm keen to draw out a little bit more of your experience in the following questions as well, just in that health environment. And it's always interesting to look to sort of adjacent industries and what lessons we can learn. So thank you for that. I think, it's clear in the aged care sector that there are a lot of challenges in attracting, retaining workforce. And I think, that's equally the case among our, more senior leadership cohorts as well. So I'm interested in hearing a little bit from each of you about what you see some of the challenges as being in attracting and retaining a talent in the leadership cohort, but also, what are some of the strategies you are seeing that are being more successful in that? And then there's maybe a few sort of subsets of that we can tease out about, the balance of internal promotion and external recruitment, etc., about how you get that mix right. So maybe Tony, I might start with you on this one.
Sure. Well, I think attracting the right talent has been sometimes a challenge historically all the time. The pandemic again has changed that completely. We're seeing, particularly in the health sector, a situation today where people are now voting with their feet. They're now in an environment where there is a lot more opportunity, and they've recognised they want to do things differently. So the pandemic is having an impact, and it'll be a theme I'll probably talk a bit about today, because I think it has changed the workforce quite dramatically, and we have to acknowledge that and do things differently. There's that challenge of balancing delivery versus development, and particularly in the environment of where services are under such pressure. There is often a focus of saying, well, it's about delivery and getting delivery needing to be done. And it is, and this is a critical role that boards play as well in testing management and making sure that actually we're focused on both. You have to hold both together, and that's the reality of leadership. You've got to hold the reality of delivering a service to your community, and at the same time developing your staff to do that. Movement within the job sector, as I mentioned earlier, I think is really a challenge now, and we're seeing a lot more of that. And the expectations are a lot different. So today, we're finding people. It used to be historically talked about the dollars, what people earned. Now it's about what's their experience, what's the flexibility, what development are they getting in the role. They're looking to those things, and they will vote very quickly with their feet in organisations that are traditionally delivering things the old way of doing things versus organisations who will actually understand their needs and try and match them into delivering the service they want to. And that's hard for organisations, because you like to sometimes have an homogenous way of delivering services. That's not the way it is now. And so leadership needs to be very much focused on those things in my mind.
Thanks, Tony. I think that's a really interesting reflection, and one, in our business we're very focused on as well is, remuneration is important, but the culture and what some people call the employee value proposition is core as well. People want to work somewhere where they feel there's an alignment of values and they're making a difference, and they've got some scope and space to make a difference. And Rosina, I know in at least one of your roles that's been a significant focus recently. Did you want to pick up on that theme about what are some of the challenges in attracting and retaining, but maybe more so hone in on what are some of the things we can do about that?
Yeah, so to add on to Tony's point, I think it's really, and it is the board's role to really hold up the mirror and go, have we set a compelling strategy, really clear strategic intent and value proposition for why talented leaders would want to come to our organisation? Talent is scarce across all industries. There are good people out there, but they're going to be attracted to organisations and working with other leaders who are prepared to go on a journey and do things in a better and different way. The other thing I would add to is, again, taking a real consumer lens to this rather than perhaps a sector lens or a regulatory lens, and going, looking at people from other sectors. And we have seen examples of recent appointments of aged care organisations, really talented leaders from hospitality or with a brand background. And I think the sector perhaps in the past has, has thought of its clients as consumers of aged care, which they are, but actually they're people, they're consumers like any others who have a life outside of the aged care services that they're purchasing. So taking that more client-focused lens and being prepared to look outside of our sector and attract in also that fresh thinking.
Thanks, Rosina. Liz, I'm wondering whether you might want to pick up on that theme as well. There's a bit of a theme there about the balance between looking from within and looking outside, but other thoughts on sort of strategies and approaches to attracting and retaining great leadership?
Well, it's certainly tough, and as we've said, and as we all know, every sector is struggling at the moment around workforce issues and attracting and retaining staff, and it's very difficult, and it's one of our biggest risks. But I think. And I think it also doesn't help when you're in a sector under huge pressure, and there's a lot of negative commentary around aged care, yet it's an incredibly fulfilling sector to work in. And if you're actually visiting sites and you're seeing the passion of staff who work there, it sometimes feels like there's a real disconnect between what you hear in the media and when you actually see staff on the front line and you see the engagement and relationship between residents and the passion of the staff delivering those services. So, I mean, I think for us, we have our mantra is around better for life for our residents and those in our care. And then we translate that to our staff. How is working with Southern Cross, for example, making you better for life? And what is that? As you spoke about, we've just refreshed and renewed our employee value proposition, reinvigorated our wellness program. We're really trying to ensure that across the board, end to end, that there is a very clear understanding of the benefit of working with us and how that translates to the role that you're doing, the opportunities that you're given. And that has certainly seen our turnover rate reduce, and aged care has quite a high turnover rate. So there are some very sort of specific strategies that we're putting in place and talking with our staff and asking them what it is that they want. How can we better support them? And it's a whole series of things. As everyone will know, there's no one magic bullet, from training and development opportunities, whether that be horizontal or vertical, the wellness programs. And I think people really feeling connected to the purpose of the organisation. And I guess it comes back to where we started around that values alignment. So, for example, in a recent survey that we did of staff, an annual survey, we were really seeing that people were saying they understand their role, how it connects to our purpose, and they, are really feeling positive about working with us. So, as a board, we sort of look at all of those different metrics to see, and then what else can we do? So it never ends. We're continually looking at, I guess, that value proposition and how we can continue to be a really strong employer.
Thanks, Liz. And that's something that's, certainly not unique to aged care, it's not unique to the sort of broader health, human services sector. It's really something, in part generational as well, about the need for people. People are much more mobile in their work, and people are looking for both, a job that helps pay the bills, but also where they feel that really strong alignment to values and can see and connect with the vision. And I think as leaders, that presents a different task than we've had before. And in the aged care sector, both operating in a more consumer-directed market in the consumer side, but also a more active market on the workforce and employee side, presents that different backdrop to the leadership task that's required. I think overlaying on that again, the rolling reforms and pressures and challenges in the sector make it a really, really challenging job. I'm interested in that context to dive into a bit of a conversation about the executive group. And I mentioned in my introduction that, some decades back there was this sort of view of a single kind of heroic chief executive at the helm of the organisation for long periods of time, sort of dynastic style arrangement. And we've moved sort of well beyond that to really understanding the importance of diversity in an executive group, diversity of thinking, diversity of backgrounds, and that we really get better, more sustainable, more innovative outcomes in that context. And so I'm interested just to draw on, and we started to pick up on this earlier, a kind of notion of how you grow a leadership cohort with that balance and diversity, how you blend external and internal pathways, and maybe then also to pick up one of the things I'm interested in, which is how much work do you do with individuals versus with a group? So if you're sort of thinking about your executive cohort, you both want them to be growing and developing as individuals, individual leaders, but you also want to be investing on how they're operating as a cohort to lead the organisation. So I've done a terrible thing as host in asking a four-barreled question there. So maybe we just start at the start, which is, what are you doing to invest in leadership capacity in your organisations, and then maybe pick up on one or more of those sub-themes. So, Liz, I might go to you first on this one.
Yeah, look, obviously coming into an organisation, you're not just handpicking from scratch. You have an executive team, and I think I guess we come at it from a number of different approaches. One, the executive attend and sit through pretty much the entire, except for the in-camera, piece of part of our board meeting. So the entire executive team is sitting and listening and hearing and engaging with the board for the entire board meeting. So we, like I said earlier, we are continually, I guess, challenging ourselves and bringing in guest speakers and different thinking that we can then have really strong discussions through. And I think that in itself is a development opportunity for the executive team in that environment, but also looking at more sort of, I guess, formal leadership education opportunities as well. But it's a whole mix of things. It's that mix of formal and informal, the interaction between the board and the executive. And I think I'm trying to think of our current executive. I think most have come up through the ranks, and it's a really diverse, strong team. And you can't take that for granted. And we are continually talking about, well, what else do we need to be thinking about? What are the development opportunities? What are perhaps are the gaps that we're seeing? And, we all have gaps or areas that we need to improve, and just making sure that every member of the executive team has those opportunities to grow and develop. And of course, at some points, there's an opportunity to bring in fresh eyes to particular parts of the business and the organisation. But I think it's very empowering to staff and very motivating when they see the opportunities for progression within up into the executive ranks. So that's something we certainly try and encourage as well.
Thanks, Liz. And Rosina, other reflections from you on the role of the board here and how you get that focus on the mix in your executive and what things you're doing to invest in either individuals or the cohort as a whole.
Yeah, so that point around, if you think of a board, we lead through the CEO, but it is absolutely critical that the board has line of sight to the bench strength of the broader team and the next layer down. So to Liz's point, that might be achieved by having executives come to the board meeting. On my aged care board, ECH, we actually have coffee with the full executive for half an hour before the board meeting. It is about getting out of the boardroom and going and visiting sites. One of the favourite things I do at ECH is every 6 months I sit in the call centre for a morning with an earpiece in, listening to the calls, and that means I get to listen to the customers and what they're calling about, but also hear the responses, but watching, how distributed the leadership is. Can we make decisions actually at the front line, or are we having to shoot it back up the chain? So I think for boards looking at as many ways as possible to really understand that bench strength. And then in terms of development opportunities, being really targeted around what's our strategic intent? What are we here to do? And how do we make sure that the leadership is actually all congruent in the same direction? So the leadership development that we're doing, the professional development, the training that we're investing in, everybody can see how it's directly linked to strategy. Because I've seen some incredible leaders go on some incredible courses, and there's personal development in that, and that's important as well. But there isn't always that clear link to the strategic direction of the organisation, and I think that's critically important for certainly the governing body to be across.
Thanks, Rosina. I think as the true consultant, I have a Venn diagram in my head of the overlap between the organisational strategy and interest and the development requirements of the individual, and how can we find what fits in the middle of that. I think that's really important. Tony, I saw you nodding away both as Liz and Rosina were talking there on some of those points. Your views either from your chief executive days or your board roles?
Well, I fully agree with what both Rosina and Liz said, and I think from my experience as well, often it's the role of executives in understanding the role of boards. I think that's often a challenge for them, and there are many executives I've worked with over years who get frustrated with boards. Well, they need to get over that. The reality is that boards play a critical role, and one of the things that I've done quite frequently is actually put all my executives through the AICD course, one, so they get to understand exactly what's expected of a director, and helps them actually better match what they're delivering to make sure they're meeting the needs of the board as well. So that I found has been a really good sort of foundational piece that I've been focused on. A lot of network leadership groups, but taking Rosina's point before, it's very important that they're focused on the strategy. So there's a lot of things you can invest money in that develop people individually, but it's got to get value back to the organisation in delivering against its strategy. So the opportunity for them to get out of their space and to meet with other people, and not necessarily from the same professional group, enables them to actually learn a little bit more about how people do things, and often other industries, because often we all think we're a bit special, and that what happens in our industry is new and unique. The reality is that the issues that are being faced in the aged care sector, or the health sector, in other sectors, while they're nuanced, they're often quite similar, and particularly in the leadership space. secondments, again, it comes down to organisations' capacity to do it, but seconding people out, getting them exposure to other organisations and other ways of thinking, excuse me, particularly for your good leaders that you want to keep who might be getting itchy feet, give them a chance to go out and look at other opportunities that might be out there, and to see how they can bring those things back. And, we're finding nowadays the opportunities, particularly, again, in the last few years around technology, short courses, micro-credentials that are out there that people can do that are focused, again, on their role and continuing to develop their role. With regard to the individual versus the group board, executive level, I think we've got to invest in both, because you can end up with fantastic executives who are operating in silos, and that's a real problem. The executive team is a critical team to actually be dealing with the issues that are being faced every day by the organisation, to be in a place where they have honest conversations as a group about the issues that are going on, to interrogate the data and each other in a respectful way, to make sure that they're challenging and the organisation is continuing to move forward. So it's very important, in my view, that not only investing in the individual, you need to carve out time to invest in the group and how they work together. Very, very critical, and a critical role, in my view, of the CEO in doing that, and ensuring you've got places that are safe for people to be able to come in and to have those conversations as an executive. The organisation I previously headed up, pretty good organisation, I have to say, but went through some pretty significant issues over the last few years around an Equal Opportunity and Human Rights Commission review into the way staff were being dealt with. A great example of then how does the organisation and its executive leadership team come together and understand reflectively what did they not do well and how do they do better into the future. So absolutely critical to invest in both, in my view.
Thanks, Tony. I think I'm really interested in your reflection about how you create a culture in your executive, whether that's as part of the executive or part of the governing body, where there is enough space to challenge and enough space to debate and disagree, but in a way that's kind of constructive rather than destructive. And in all organisations, people have got their own kind of careers and motivations, as well as those of the organisation they're thinking about. And I think often in Australian organisations, we probably don't have enough debate and tension. And in some of the organisations I work with and sit in on either board or executive meetings, it's something we really work on, trying to encourage how you can get better by politely challenging and pushing and disagreeing. I think that's a really important concept. I'd like to just dive into your board mix a little bit now as well, and thinking about your governing bodies and the boards you're involved in now. We've got the new strengthened governance requirements coming into place, or have come into place in the aged care sector. And Rosina, we were talking the other day just about how the skill matrix on boards has changed over the last 5 to 10 years, and what are some of the skills and characteristics you're needing to find and build, and perhaps how are you going about sourcing some of that diverse thinking for your boards?
So perhaps when we were talking about this, I'll share with the group, I was a little bit provocative and said it's a bit, I was saddened that, it's taken legislation to actually mandate that if you're providing clinical services, you'd have someone with clinical governance skills, for example, on your board, or even that you would have, a number of independent board directors sitting around the board table. So, look, it's great that that's there as the base mark. My board and many, many others have already been doing that for a number of years. I think actually, as we look forward, if I think about the skills matrix of our board now compared to 3 years ago, the two areas of skill that are different that we have sought and brought onto our board are around digital innovation and technology. There is absolutely no doubt that digital is going to be part of how organisations will innovate, provide better service, actually improve their quality, their monitoring systems, their oversight of data, to pick up Tony's point from before. So certainly that digital. The other one is strategic brand, and that is about recognising it's one thing to say your client is at the centre or you're very client focused. It's another to think of it through the brand lens. What makes great brands? It's not their logo. It's not the amount they spend on advertising. It's the absolute clarity of purpose and then how they drive through every part of the organisation, whether that's in the people they recruit, whether it's in the way they engage with their customer, the level of investment they'll make to take friction out of the process in dealing with their customer, to the quality of their research, their development, their innovation. And when you have that clarity and it drives all the way through every touch point of the organisation, that becomes really clear to the and actually makes your proposition attractive to the customer. So they're two key skills that we've certainly added to our board and see as absolutely critical. And then how you attract board members to particularly to your board. I think there's a big acknowledgement that these boards are really serious boards with serious responsibility. So they're not boards for directors with their training wheels on, if I can be really frank. I think it goes back to how do you spark the interest of a high-performing director to want to come and join your board? And it is about, is your strategic intent compelling? It is about who else is around the table. Are they people that a new board member is going to want to work with? So are they prepared to want to think differently as well? Is the organisation compelling, and not just where it's heading, but the quality of what they do? So you have to think about it in attracting talent in that broadest sense all the way to your board and really spark that interest so that, people are really wanting to join the board rather than boards going, oh, can we just get someone to fill this spot?
Thanks, Rosina. And Tony, I might come to you on that one now about what changes are you seeing in the board leadership that's required and the mix of skills there.
Well, Rosina's absolutely spot on with regard to the issues around technology and digital. I mean, that's becoming particularly critical for organisations going forward, and ensuring that they've got the right, in my experience, the right expertise around the board table in that space. The other big one is around the people and culture space. So, organisations live and die by their culture and by the way in which they operate in that regard. And if you look at that in the context of also the development of our people, looking at those areas, having that expertise at a senior level around the boardroom table actually ensures that those questions are being asked and it's not lost in the milieu of all the other noise that often goes on in any organisation that is getting the attention. The cultural piece, as I highlighted earlier, can catch some organisations off guard. And can significantly undermine their recognition within the broader community. We mentioned before clinical governance, and that's absolutely critical. And in the context earlier, we were talking about just this risk tolerance and risk management, really making sure we've got good risk leaders around the boardroom table. I have to say, in my previous organisation, some of the best conversations we had were with people who are expert in risk and got us thinking about risk in avoiding it being the book that sits on the shelf and gets pulled out every year for the various conversations with board. You actually live it on a day-to-day basis and are actually looking at your risk tolerance and being able to ensure you're able to make advances in a highly regulated environment in a way that actually has good risk frameworks around it. Attraction, again, I like Rosina's comment earlier. I think it is about attraction to your board should be no different than attracting to your senior leadership of your organisation. Advertising it the right way, highlighting the value of being on the board, identify, often using specialised firms to help you get the right skill set, like you would for a senior executive in your organisation. It's absolutely critical in doing that. And I think from a board perspective, it is very much about, again, constantly testing yourself, looking at your metrics, looking at your effectiveness reviews on an annual basis, and asking yourself, as the world is moving and changing, have you got the right skill set around the boardroom table? And ensuring that that's on the work plan of every board to be looking at on a cyclical basis, and a critical role, obviously, of the chair in those circumstances as well.
Thanks, Tony. Building on that, Liz, and we've got a few questions coming through from the audience as well, just about, well, there's a range of them that really go to the issue of workforce challenges broadly. Some of them are about, well, investing in leadership's great, but fundamentally we can't find the workforce we need to be able to open the capacity. In this case, it's a bed capacity, but might otherwise be in a home care setting. And then a subset of questions around, well, in particular in the not-for-profit sector, how do we make those board roles attractive? They are big roles, they're important roles, they carry significant risk. How do we make those roles attractive to people, Liz?
Yeah, look, it's a huge challenge, and I think when you just look at the breadth of experience that you need from your board in aged care, it's of course foundational to have that clinical expertise and clinical governance. But you look at Southern Cross, for example, $1 billion worth of assets, a huge asset base, asset management, procurement, IT infrastructure, people and culture, workforce issues, marketing, branding. It's just a huge breadth of expertise that you need around the board table. I think Corduroy in his research shows that 60 to 70% of aged care providers are operating at a loss. So again, trying to attract really high caliber board members in that environment is very, I imagine, very difficult. So, I mean, as we've said before, certainly you look at who's currently on the board, and that's certainly the steps that I took, and looking at the gender mix and the expertise of the current board members and the chair. But I think, I would bring it back to values and purpose, and the expertise that is there, and going out and attracting talent. It's no different to any other sector. As I think Rosina was saying, you have to be very clear about your value proposition, what it is that you will be contributing to in delivering, and really highlighting that alignment to purpose. But it is a huge challenge. But I think if I look at our own experience, we're certainly very clear on our purpose and where are those gaps in expertise around the board table, looking at the breadth of the business, and certainly also having the commercial and strategic eye as well. Because at the end of the day, as we say, there's no purpose without profit. You have to be running a very strong business, and it all comes back to the care, but there are so many other pieces of the puzzle that you have to bring together to deliver aged care. So, it's like any other business. You have to be really clear on your value proposition, on what it is that you stand for, and hopefully, if that's really strong, you can attract the right people. But you have to be really clear about the risk that you're taking on, and that people are coming to you for the right reasons, and they're very strong on risk and governance.
Thanks.
Thanks. Ben, I'd love to jump in there as well, and just offer a comment, because I without a doubt, that question from the audience around attracting workforce to regional areas, without a doubt, the talent is even shortage is even more acute there. I've seen some really innovative ideas of aged care organisations. One organisation that was featured on a TV program recently actually sought to attract and train workforce that had retired into the aged care sector. And the pilot was incredibly successful. They had, I think it was over 100 applications for something like 18 positions. So the interest was really phenomenal. The other one I have seen, a colleague of mine happens to be in regional Queensland, and they're all facing the same, as well as the workforce shortage, as we know there's a quality housing shortage, and rentals are hard to come by. And a group of different organisations in the not-for-profit and for private sector actually clubbed together, seeking to invest in suitable property and accommodation that then they could offer to attract the workforce to a quality rental. So that bit's taken out of the puzzle. So they're just little anecdotes, but I hope what they will do is give the people on this call confidence that if we put our minds together and try and do things in little creative ways, it won't solve all the problems, but it will just make us find different ways of cutting through to some solutions.
Thanks, Tony. I think you were keen to jump in there as well.
Yeah, just to build on Rosina's comment, maybe again to give another anecdote, because sometimes these experiences are helpful to people. As an emergency service, Ambulance Victoria delivering first responder training out across rural Victoria, and provided vocational qualifications around that. It was really interesting that a number of people who did that, probably close to 30 or 40 women, were living in rural communities who've got this qualification, then took it further to be able to move into aged care. So they actually had a vocational qualification that was a pathway into aged care. And it was often the first one they'd had. They wanted to continue to care in their community. So I think those opportunities to think differently, to think about partnering with other big organisations, particularly in rural communities such as the fire services and other emergency services. Again, they're not a natural fit in people's minds, but you've got the common values of care and people looking to do something and give something back. So I've just wanted to reinforce Rosina's comment. I think sometimes we often think about them with the same solutions of today. And if you think a bit differently and talk to other groups out there, you might find you're tapping into a well that wasn't thought of in the past.
Thanks, Tony. I've got a really small-scale example, some work done actually through the funding through the National Disability Insurance Scheme, the ILC grant program, where a range of people with disabilities were put through the Cert 2 training, placed in aged care facilities, all of whom have subsequently been employed by those facilities. Now, that's been a really small-scale example, but one that I thought was really fantastic and got some coverage on the ABC relatively recently. We're coming towards the end of our discussion, and I think, Rosina and Tony, to your points there about sort of personal anecdotes, I'm keen to give the audience a Christmas gift from each of you by way of, I guess, a reflection from your personal leadership journeys, just on, if you could provide one piece of advice, perhaps by way of an anecdote of a leadership challenge or opportunity you've experienced, what might that be? If there's something people could come back after the holiday break and think about actioning as part of their leadership role in their organisation, be that on the executive or the board. So Liz, I might come to you first on that one.
I think really pushing yourself to talk to different people, so not staying in your own little bubble. So certainly that's something that I have made a concerted effort to do, to reach out, go to conferences, talk to people, and then get diverse views. And so for me, that means following up with, I've got a coffee catch up coming up with a CEO of another large aged care organisation. And we actually have a CEO of an entity in Queensland who has a very different approach to dementia care. and again, reaching out and talking to diverse people to challenge your thinking and to widen your mind to different ways, I guess, of thinking about this sector that we operate in.
And Liz, thinking about, I mean, you've worked across banking, finance, automotive, transport, government, etc. Is there a learning you've got from one of those other sectors that you've found really kind of useful in coming into your aged care sector roles? Something that maybe the rest of your board or executive maybe hadn't thought of, but on the basis of your work in automotive, you could see something that you might be able to do differently?
Yeah, I think it's just that having exposure to so many different sectors, that broad thinking. So I kind of never take no for an answer, or that's too hard, or it happened here but it failed. So I guess I will always challenge that kind of thinking. There is always a solution. It's just a matter of some creative thinking, some critical thinking, and I think really pushing yourself not to follow what's been done in the past, or just because something failed over here, you're not going to try something new. So I think I definitely always come from the approach, and it's probably just from working across so many different sectors, to always challenge, I guess, basic assumptions, or if you're told that, no, that's not possible. So just continue to respectfully challenge, and always be looking at what's happening more broadly through, making sure you're a part of the right other membership groups, that you're reading, you're up to date with the latest research. There is so much going on in aged care and in health generally, but also outside around, for example, AI as well, and how AI from other sectors can now be used in aged care. So I guess it's looking at those kind of examples and bringing them to ensure that we can deliver an even better service and higher quality care in this sector.
Thanks so much, Liz. Tony, a Christmas or holiday gift from you for those who don't celebrate Christmas?
Sure. Well, one thing that stuck with me and sticks with me even today is the adage, you can't improve what you don't measure. And I think, often, and even up today, many people may be sitting there going, this is a bit insurmountable. How do I actually find a path forward? In my experience, it's about baselining. Just compare yourself to yourself and say, where do I want to be tomorrow? And what's my data telling me, and what can I do? And in the leadership space, that's very much about understanding what are the gaps that you might have as an organisation, and both at a board level and an executive and another leadership level, and then just setting yourself a plan to say, well, where are the areas I need to focus on over the next, say, 3 months, and make an incremental change, and then make another incremental change. And before you know it, your organisation is heading in the right direction. And I think for me, that's always been the way. When I'm under pressure and I've got the challenges of organisations, the big organisations to run, it's about, okay, what's the data telling us? What can we move forward on? And it's, it's eating the elephant one bite at a time, and you will improve your organisation.
Thanks, Tony. And Rosina, a last thought from you?
From me, it would be role model the behaviour, the courage and the creativity that you want to see in your leadership team.
Fabulous. Very clear, crisp, succinct. Thank you. Thanks, Rosina. And look, thank you to all of our panellists today. I know it's a very busy time of year. We really appreciate you giving your time to share with us today. Directly following today's event, you will be sent an email with a link to provide feedback. Speaking of Christmas gifts, feedback is a gift, and we would really love to hear how you found today, so that we can continue to change and improve and make sure that what we're delivering is meeting your needs. Please also make sure, if you haven't done so already, that you do complete the diagnostic tool, which is available on the Governing for Reform website. It's a short survey. The point of this is to give a sense of areas of strength and development needs, and those results can support you to identify aspects of the program that might be best suited to supporting your further development. As mentioned earlier, we have sent an email associated with your registration for today's webinar with reminders about other events that you can access as part of this program. Please make sure you join us for the 9th in the webinar series, which is scheduled for the 1st of February 2023, and which will focus on clinical governance, which was touched on today as well. Thank you for joining us.